Good evening. I'm Sharon Brodkey, and I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Omaha's newly chartered Jewish Community Relations Council, or JCRC, as it is known in the alphabet soup of Jewish agencies. I'd like to welcome you all this evening with a brief introduction to what the JCRC is and its role in the Jewish community and community at large. Jewish Community Relations Councils are known as their community's conveners. There are more than 125 local JCRCs across the United States. While the JCRC is new to this community, our work has actually been going on here in Omaha for decades, and we have a very deep national Jewish bench. Our partners include all the major Jewish organizations like B'nai B'rith, Hadassah, the National Council of Jewish Women, the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, the Jewish Federations of North America, all of the major religious streams of Judaism across the spectrum of observance and tradition, and of course, our allies at the Anti-Defamation League. All of these partners stand at the ready with resources, expertise, and a spirit of cooperation to develop strategies on issues of priority and concern and to respond to current events. In Omaha, we are dedicated to working in common cause to enhance cooperation with other religious, racial, ethnic, and civic groups to foster a just, democratic, and pluralistic society, as well as promote the security of Israel and Jews everywhere. Guided by Jewish values, the JCRC advocates, educates, collaborates, and mobilizes action on issues important to the Jewish community and greater community. This evening's event was actually born out of a national conversation that began with the Jewish Federations of North America in July, immediately upon SCOTUS's Dobbs v. Jackson decision. And while this is our first community conversation, it is by no means going to be the last. I want to express my deepest gratitude to our partners in this evening's conversation, all of whom enthusiastically embraced this gathering and made tonight possible. The Women's Fund of Omaha, ACLU Nebraska, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Nebraska, and of course, our Jewish Federation of Omaha. Welcome to our Jewish Community Center. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the JCRC, Zoe Reiches.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm Zoe Reiches, and it is my privilege to serve as the chair of the new Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Omaha. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the JCRC's first community conversation. We are especially excited to welcome those of you who have never been to the Jewish Community Center. This is a place of welcome, and we are so glad to be joined by so many new friends. I'm going to borrow some words from a few of the 125 Jewish federations and JCRCs across the country. Our Jewish community is informed by the unique experience of living and thriving in the United States, where constitutionally guaranteed religious freedom is a founding principle of our country. Our positions on complex issues are guided by Jewish values and the tenets of equal protection under the law, freedom of religious expression, and the separation of religion and government. Jewish tradition affirms the value of human life. I also want to emphasize that the Jewish community in Omaha and across the country is not a monolith. Decisions about reproductive health care involve theological views that differ within the Jewish community. As the JCRC, we affirm the importance of respect of differing points of view, an essential element in our pluralistic American society within our Jewish community. Our rabbis are the providers of private and compassionate pastoral care to individuals who seek out spiritual guidance on a range of matters, including reproductive health. allowing individuals to consider the rich teachings of Jewish tradition while making their own decisions. It is important that we ensure that reproductive choice is treated with the most sensitivity and dignity. The Jewish Community Relations Council endorses the preservation of religious choice and opposes restrictions imposed by federal, state, or local law which would prevent or delay an individual from making a reproductive health decision in accord with their own religious views, often in consultation with clergy and physicians. Before we move on, when you entered this beautiful theater, you were given a program with a note card on it and a pen. During the evening, if you wish to ask a question of one of the panelists, please use the note card and we will be around to collect your questions during the Q&A. I'd also like to call your attention to the QR code inside of the program. Use that to access additional resources and information after this evening's presentations. And speaking of the QR code, there is a post-event evaluation with a few very brief questions that you can use to share your feedback. We'd be so appreciative if you would take a few moments and let us know your thoughts or additional questions. Finally, as you leave this evening, there will be information on the tables across from the donor wall. There will also be some volunteers who can assist you in registering to vote if you haven't already. And your voice matters in this upcoming election on November 8th. Before our panel discussion begins, I'd like to leave you with this thought. There is a compilation of the teachings and maxims from rabbinic Jewish tradition called Pirkei Avot, or Chapters of the Fathers, sometimes translated as Ethics of the Fathers. In chapter 4, Pirkei Avot teaches us who is wise, a person who learns from everyone. Tonight, we are coming together to listen and to learn. I'd like to introduce our moderator for our panel, JCRC board member and chair of our Civil Rights Committee, Carol Block, who will introduce our distinguished panelists.
I would like to add my welcome to everybody who is here. Welcome to our living room. And welcome to everybody who's here in the theater and also to those who are participating through Zoom. You won't be disappointed. We have experts here that are going to give you a lot of information. I will do very brief introductions of each of our speakers, and then each of them will give a short presentation. After that, there will be time for the Q&A, and please submit the questions on your note cards and hand them to Pam, wherever she is. There she is, and she will ask the questions for you. That will save us some time. Those of you who are on Zoom can ask your questions in the Q&A, and you're welcome to sign your name to the questions or not, as you choose. We're all about choice. Rabbi Stephen Abraham. Rabbi Abraham has been the congregational rabbi for Bethel Synagogue for almost 10 years. He currently sits on many local and national boards of directors, and he is a founding board member of the Nebraska Religious Council for Reproductive Freedom. He will discuss the Jewish perspective on abortion. Gilda Said is joining us via Zoom. Gilda was a principal research scientist at the well-known Guttmacher Institute. She will discuss the global perspective, including the unmet need for contraception in developing countries, the impact of abortion bans, and abortion trends worldwide. Dr. Stephanie Gustin is a reproductive endocrinologist in Omaha. Dr. Gustin is extremely knowledgeable about ethnic differences in fertility and reproduction, embryo transfer technique, recurrent pregnancy loss, ectopic or non-viable pregnancy, and primary ovarian insufficiency. Andy Curry Grubb is the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Advocates of Nebraska. She's also the Executive Director of the Nebraska State Planned Parenthood North Central States. She continues to be a powerful advocate for all of us on reproductive health, and she will tell us about current access to that health in Nebraska. Scout Richters is the Senior Legal Policy Counsel for ACLU in Nebraska. Her work centers around gender equality and reproductive freedom. She helps to defend the rights of women who are pregnant or parenting at work, at school, and while incarcerated. And last and far but least, Dr. Erin Feitzinger, Policy Director of the Women's Fund of Omaha. Erin's expertise includes working on policies to increase housing, food, and economic security at the local and the state level. She will tell us how each of us has a role to play in taking action to protect the rights that we all care about. You're up.
I'm up.
You're up.
So first of all, I'm honored to be here this evening with such a distinguished panel, and my thanks to the JCRC for putting on this event, although maybe next time it wouldn't be as close to the Jewish holidays. But nevertheless, I wanted to be clear, as Zoe said before, that in all issues, not just abortion, I, as a rabbi, look at the world through a Jewish lens. These lenses help me make sense of the world. What I want to be clear about is that while more than 80% of the Jewish world agrees with how I see these issues and how I read Jewish text on abortion, the issue is not without debate, even in Jewish circles. When it comes to the question of abortion, Jewish law allows for it and does not hold that a fetus is a person at conception. The Babylonian Talmud, one of our most sacred texts and without which we cannot fully understand the Torah, explains that for the first 40 days of gestation, a fetus is considered to be fluid. To give a couple of texts just to kind of flesh out where my thinking comes from. It says that if a woman is found to be pregnant until the 40th day, it is still considered to be fluid. And further, the fetus is considered part of the mother for the duration of the pregnancy. Said perhaps more plainly and clearly, a fetus does not take on the status of being a person until birth. In fact, in a different section of the Gemara of the Talmud, it says that we hold that a fetus is considered as part of its mother's thigh. That is, it's considered part of its mother's body. The Talmud also explains that if a mother's life is in danger from pregnancy, even in labor, the fetus would be sacrificed to save her life unless the baby's head has already emerged from the womb, at which point the fetus is now considered, and only at that point, considered an independent soul. We learn in the Mishnah that if a woman is having trouble giving birth, they would be even able to take apart the child because her life, that being the life of the mother, comes before the life of the child. But if the greater part has come out, that is to say, as I said before, if you can see the child, you can see the baby, one may not touch it. For Jewish law says that one may not set aside one's person's life to save another, which is to say that you may not pick A over B, but it also makes even clearer that to say that a fetus is not considered a life for which you are making a choice about. In Judaism, saving a life is of the utmost importance. And in a situation where the mother's life is in danger, an abortion may not only be allowed, but required. The question may arise, what about cases where the mother's life is not in mortal danger? A wide range of contemporary scholars have permitted abortion when a fetus may cause mental pain and suffering if carried to term. Such esteemed rabbis, Orthodox, I might add, this is Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, has pointed out that here it is clear that saving a life is not only a sanction for permitting an abortion, he went on to say. It would seem to me that issues such as dignity, domestic peace and pain, which all carry significant halachic weight, that is to say from Jewish law, in other contexts, should be considered in making these decisions. While on a slightly divergent point, but something I think is very important to point out, that many Christian communities derive proof texts against abortion using the Hebrew Bible. These texts specifically quote verses from about God forming humans in the womb, whether that be from Psalms, Jeremiah, or the prophet Isaiah. But these texts do not even register in our Jewish legal conversation on the topic. Said perhaps more clearly, Judaism does not determine laws based on Psalms or prophets. It is clear that Judaism does not see a fetus as being until it is outside of the mother. Until that point, the fetus is part of the mother and the mother's life takes precedence. It is also clear that abortion can be permitted in cases when it's not just about saving the life of the pregnant individual. That is to say that pain is emotional or psychological. I'm here as a rabbi, but I want to be clear that there are many faith leaders for whom I am standing on their shoulders or they are next to me in spirit. I was honored, as Zoe said, to be a founding member of the Nebraska Religious Council for Reproductive Freedom, an organization whose goal is to affirm the moral power of faith by protecting, affirming, and advancing reproductive justice through safe access channels statewide. We hear a lot of talk about religious freedom nowadays. I only pray that one day that term will extend to my religious beliefs as well. Again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this evening.
Thank you. very much. Thank you. Gilda, welcome to Omaha. You're on.
Thank you. That was really powerful and moving, those opening remarks. So thank you for those. I wish I could be with you in person. I lived in Omaha for a while and I would have loved to have been able to travel back for this, but I'm glad I can be with you at all. I was asked to offer a few comments on Dobbs in the global context. And I'll share some evidence from other countries that might be relevant to the US going forward. And if there's time, I'll talk about what the global reverberations of Dobbs might be. So I'll start with how the Supreme Court ruling situates the US globally, and that is that the US is now an outlier on the global stage. 53 countries have changed their abortion laws in this century since the year 2000, and of those 53, 50 countries changed their laws by expanding the grounds for legal abortion. Nicaragua and Poland and now the US are the only 3 countries to have backtracked on the legality of abortion. The US is especially an anomaly when compared to other high-income countries. Before the Supreme Court ruling in Dobbs, less than 1% of women across Europe and the US lived under restrictive abortion laws. Most countries with restrictive abortion laws are low and middle income countries. With abortion laws in the US now set at the state level, the country as a whole can't be classified as having either a protective or restrictive abortion law. We now have a patchwork of abortion laws across states. And as of last month, 22 million women of reproductive age in the US live under the highly restrictive abortion laws that are more typical of low and middle income countries. And we can expect more states to adopt restrictive abortion laws and policies as state legislatures reconvene early next year. The second point that I'd make is that abortion is no less common in countries where it is largely illegal than where it is legal. The lowest abortion rates in the world are in countries with liberal abortion laws, and the steepest declines in the incidence of abortion over the past 20 years have also been in countries with liberal abortion laws. What that means is that where abortion is illegal, many women who need to avoid having a child find a way to get an abortion. Some women cross national borders to get a legal abortion. For example, many women in Ireland traveled to England and Wales for an abortion before abortion was made legal in Ireland in 2019. And we can expect to see more of this in the US, women crossing state lines and even national borders, north and south, because abortion is legal both north of us and south of us in the US. Also, in the past 20 years or so, medication abortion has become much more common around the world. That's abortion using misoprostol, a pill, sometimes in conjunction with mifepristone. Even where abortion is illegal, some women manage to obtain those drugs, and medication abortion is safe when used properly. But lots of other women in other countries get unsafe abortions using the methods and the objects that we have heard about from the pre-Roe days, like Coke bottles and sticks and twigs. And that takes me to my third point. So the first being that in terms of the legal status of abortion, the US is an anomaly now compared to the global trends, and restricting legal access to abortion does not really prevent abortion from happening in a significant way. And the third point is that where abortion is illegal, it's more likely to be done under unsafe conditions. Abortion is a simple procedure, and in most countries where it's broadly legal, nearly all abortions are done safely. But on average, in countries where abortion is largely illegal, only 25% of abortions happen safely. The negative impacts of restrictive abortion laws are highly inequitable. Evidence from other countries shows that women who live in poverty are more likely than their better off counterparts to have an unsafe abortion and to experience complications from an unsafe abortion, and they are less likely to seek treatment for their complications, either because they can't afford to, or they don't know where to get care, or they're afraid to get care. So what can we expect in the US? Restrictive laws in the states that enact them are unlikely to substantially lower the incidence of abortion, though those abortions won't be happening at in-state clinics. So it might look like fewer women are having abortions in those states. But we can expect a growing number of abortions to be done under unsafe conditions. An unsafe abortion in the US might not be as common under Dobbs as it was in the years preceding Roe. This is because someone will be able to get medication abortion, whether legally or illegally. Someone will be able to travel to get a safe one, and women will be able to use the internet to find their way to a safe abortion. But the effects will be uneven and unequal. Already, poor and low-income women make up 75% of abortion patients in the US, and Black and brown women have a higher rate of abortion than their white counterparts. So we can expect these groups of women to disproportionately suffer the consequences of Dobbs. I'm going to condense my points with respect to what the global reverberations of Dobbs might be, how it might play out in other countries. And here we really are in the realm of speculation. But there is a lot of concern that Dobbs will embolden conservative anti-choice movements in other countries and slow down or reverse the trend toward liberalizing abortion laws. In 1973, US was one of the first countries to make abortion legal, and many other countries followed us. There's also concern that it will embolden those who aim to restrict access to abortion services. Doctors, for example, might be more likely to cite conscientious objection as a reason for not providing abortion services. And that has been an obstacle in some countries to a significant level. But the reverberations can also go the other way. In July, the European Union's Parliament overwhelmingly condemned Dobbs and the end of the constitutional protections for abortion in the US. And they called for safeguards to be enshrined in the EU's Fundamental Rights Charter. Earlier this year, the World Health Organization released safe abortion guidelines. They do that every 10 years ago, and those guidelines are based on the latest evidence. And for the first time, the WHO called for decriminalizing abortion, and they even endorsed self-managed abortion. So what remains to be seen is whether other countries are going to follow the US or follow the evidence. And I will pause there because I know there's a number of other people who would like to speak, but thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And stick around. We'll probably have some questions for you as we proceed. Dr. Gustin?
Yes, hi, my name is Stephanie Gustin, and I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak. As many of you probably saw, my specialty or background is in reproductive endocrinology and infertility, and my life's work is to help people build families. So how I got here has been an evolution. I would say that as a physician, my political aptitude was within the confines of my home. And I think as physicians in general, we are trained to treat the patient in front of us without any bias as to what they bring to the table. We treat their condition, we don't treat their political affiliation or their ethnic background or the way that they look. But our silence as physicians is becoming problematic, especially as it relates to what's happening in our country with the reversal of Roe versus Wade. So we have had to step out of our comfort zone and put our the safety of our patients out there for everybody to understand. And so how I got involved, and probably many of you know about it, but if you don't, then I can catch you up very quickly, is that in the spring, a bill was brought to the floor for vote that was called LB 933. And that was a trigger band that defined life at conception, so upon fertilization. And that trigger band criminalized anyone that was involved in a termination of that life. And that penalty could be up to 20 years of prison. So as a fertility specialist working with patients and making embryos, a fertilized egg is that, right? And we may not all know in this room, but human reproduction is flawed incredibly. Actually, we are very inefficient. And so when we go to help people who are struggling to get pregnant, we take eggs from a body, we make embryos. Not all of those eggs fertilize normally. Not all of those normally fertilized eggs make embryos, and not all those embryos make babies, right? And so when we realized that this abortion ban that almost passed would have not only affect a woman's ability to choose to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason, it would have affected pretty much any walking, breathing woman needing reproductive care, including fertility care, including management of a miscarriage, including management of an ectopic, and including termination of a pregnancy. In my cases, terminations of highly desired pregnancies, and that happens. And we have to support those women. So that ban brought me out to start talking about the impact of people who are not educated about medicine making decisions on behalf of the community, on behalf of patients. And so we're here to sort of talk about that. What we have seen amongst my colleagues throughout the nation is in states where there are bans, where there are trigger bans, where there are heartbeat laws, et cetera, is that women are suffering. We're already seeing it. And what we know, or you may not know in our state, is that abortion is actually very severely restricted in the state of Nebraska. There are less than 5 abortion providers for the entire state. There is a 22-week ban, which allows women and couples to access a termination of pregnancy within a week of finding out if there's something horribly wrong with their pregnancy. There's not a lot of time. Making more restrictions on any access to abortion in the state is not going to prevent abortion. It's just going to make it unsafe for women to seek reproductive care for whatever they need in the state. And that's why I'm here to sort of talk to you as a physician that we need to allow the sanctity of the patient-physician relationship to be preserved. We need to keep politics out of the exam room, and we need to exemplify the bad things that can happen if politicians and people who are not educated about medicine start making decisions about how physicians and providers should take care of their patients. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Andy?
Yes, hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's an honor to be invited to this event. So I'm here, about a year ago, most of us knew that abortion access was going to change in our country and probably drastically, but we didn't know exactly how. We didn't know what it was going to look like yet. Unfortunately, now we have a better picture. Just over a year ago, Texas's SB 8 law was allowed to be implemented by the Supreme Court. So Texas has virtually had an abortion ban for almost a year at this point. And then just about 3 months ago, obviously, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. So we are seeing the impacts throughout the country. So I want to share a little bit of what that looks like here in Nebraska right now. You've likely heard or read or seen some of these stories across the country. Some of them are absolutely horrific. I'm here to kind of share and assure you that these stories are not headlines. These are the day-to-day experiences of people that are trying to access healthcare. These are folks who just happen to be burdened because of where they live, right? So Planned Parenthood in this region, we cover Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska. And across our entire region, there are 3 states that still have abortion access, and all 3 of those states have seen a significant increase in patients coming from out of state. Most of them are coming from Texas and Oklahoma. Those are the most common ones we see, but we've seen patients from Georgia and Louisiana and Idaho and all over the country. This has also really shifted the way that we support patients who are seeking abortion care, because it has become incredibly complicated, and the logistical burdens on patients who are coming from out of state is quite significant. The first place that most of our patients end up is through a phone call to schedule an appointment. So we have a patient services is the first person that they would likely speak to. Since the Supreme Court decision came out, our patient services team has seen an average of 20% increase in call volume every single day since the Dobbs case passed. So not only are they seeing more phone calls, talking to more patients every day, but the conversations are much more complicated. It used to be as simple as having someone call, asking them some questions, finding out what service they wanted, scheduling them, answering a few questions, and everyone went on with their day. Now we have patients who may need to take time off of work. They may need to secure childcare. They're figuring out if they fly or if they drive, figuring out a place to stay, sometimes for multiple nights, depending on their situation. And this is complicating patients' ability to access care. There are a couple stories that continue to kind of sit with me. I heard just 2 stories within the last 2 weeks of patients coming up from Texas, one to Iowa and one to Nebraska, who were driving U-Haul trucks because it was the only vehicle available to them to get them to their appointment on time. We've heard stories of patients who've had to be shuffled to another state because they missed their flight because their childcare didn't show up on time. These stories are more common than they should be right now, and they're heartbreaking because this is people's lives that are being impacted by this on such a daily basis. And we know that these burdens in reality are insurmountable for some folks, specifically for folks who are already vulnerable in our communities, mostly because of systemic issues within our communities. Racism and poverty and a very broken healthcare system are already impacting these folks, and now we're taking healthcare away from them. As Dr. Gustin talked about a little bit, we also are seeing that it is not just abortion care specifically that is being impacted. Pregnancy care is seeing impacts of this as well, quite significantly. Physicians are now having to deal with this burden of felony charges if they make a decision that a judge deems not necessary in the way that they treat a pregnant person and their child. So this burden is really causing physicians to have to make decisions that they shouldn't have to. As Stephanie said, we need our physicians focused on patients, their expertise, their training, their medical best practices, and not a concern of conviction. But this is starting to impact miscarriage management. Folks are being investigated for miscarriages now in some of the states that have banned abortion to make sure that they didn't have an illegal abortion. We're seeing even here in Nebraska, there was a story not too long ago of a pharmacy denying a patient's prescription for a miscarriage treatment medication because that same medication can be used to induce an abortion. So we're starting to see the ramifications that just go on and on. And as Dr. Gustin talked about, these restrictions are not new. They've been chipping away at this for a long time. And that's why we're here. We need this to stop. We need to let our physicians do their jobs, use their expertise, and focus on us as patients. And we need to trust people. We need to trust that people know what's best for themselves, their bodies, their lives, their futures, and let them get on with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Scott?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for including me in this discussion. For my portion, I'm just going to look a little bit deeper at the national landscape with respect to abortion and kind of what that means for us here in Nebraska. So as we've already mentioned, just some key points from the Dobbs decision. In June, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And this overturning of Roe was truly unprecedented, as we had previously had almost 50 years in which people who could become pregnant really could build their lives around this idea that and this understanding that they had the constitutional right to terminate a pregnancy. And so all of that was shattered with the Dobbs decision. So in Dobbs, the court held that there's no constitutional right to abortion, and that the 14th Amendment's right to privacy does not include the right to abortion, as had always been the case under Roe and Casey. And so because abortion is no longer considered a constitutional right, state legislators now have a huge amount of deference to regulate abortion, as Roe is no longer in place to be that backstop to protect the right of a pregnant person to have an abortion. So Roe and Casey previously provided a floor that states could not ban abortion pre-viability, and now states are essentially free to regulate abortion to almost any extent. And so as some of the other speakers have mentioned, as predicted, Dobbs has dramatically changed abortion access throughout the entire country. The bottom line is that people across the country have lost or will soon lose access. It's currently estimated that 1 in 3 people who can become pregnant do not have access to abortion care. And as Gilda mentioned, we have a patchwork of abortion laws that vary from state to state, and laws will likely continue to change to further restrict access for more and more people. And then switching gears just a little bit, there are, of course, too many harms, and we've named many, but there are too many harms to name that come from banning abortion in the time that we have here. But just to summarize, for those who don't have resources, they will be forced to remain pregnant against their will. As Andy and Dr. Gustin mentioned, most abortion bans do so by criminalizing providers for providing care. And again, as I mentioned, bans have implications for how they care for miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, IVF, and really create a situation where providers have to think about their legal liability, even in emergency situations, when, as Andy and Dr. Gustin mentioned, they should be solely concerned with treating their patient. Again, aside from criminalizing doctors, we now have a landscape where all miscarriages and pregnancy losses and self-managed abortions are more likely to be investigated and prosecuted as crimes. And you know, abortion bans also make it more difficult, if not impossible, for women and girls and people who can become pregnant to complete their education, to enter and remain in the workforce, and just be able to fully participate in all aspects of political and public life. Abortion bans will likely increase maternal mortality. There was a study out of Colorado, University of Colorado, that found that a total ban on the procedure could increase pregnancy-related deaths up to 21% and 33% for Black women. So the bottom line is clear, and that is that the harms of banning abortion are far-reaching and long-term, and they reverberate across areas both on the micro and macro level. And it's really simply impossible to understate all the harms that stem from banning abortion. And then lastly, as you'll hear likely time and time again tonight, abortion does remain legal in Nebraska. We do have numerous restrictions, as other speakers have mentioned, that make access difficult. We have a ban on telemedicine. We have parental involvement laws for minors seeking abortion care. patients have to listen to bias counseling, and the list goes on. That's just to name a few of the restrictions we have. But despite those restrictions, a coalition of reproductive rights advocates and Nebraskans from across the state have been fighting to maintain that access here in Nebraska. And I think you've heard about LB 933, as Dr. Gustin mentioned, the trigger ban that would have made abortion illegal right now as we sit here today had we not stopped it. And you also, I think Aaron will tell you about specific ways that you can take action to keep abortion legal here in Nebraska. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your willingness to take action to keep abortion legal here in Nebraska.
Thank you, Scout. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Feichner.
Feeling a lot of pressure right now after. Sorry, I was told I was the funny one, so I have some things to live up to here. So there are 3 actions that we need from you. There's lots of actions we need from you, but primarily the human brain can conceptualize 3, and that's an easy, manageable number. So that's what I'm going to give you. First, we need you to be talking about abortion, not fighting about abortion with Twitter hashtag Joe Smith 895-765 American flag, right? Like talking about abortion with your friends, your families, and your networks, and talk about why abortion access fits into your values, your shared values with your community, the values that we hold as people who exist together in space on this earth. This is called values-based messaging. It's been tested over and over and over again, and it's been proven to be really effective at meeting folks where they are. This is a deeply emotional topic. It's a deeply personal topic fundamentally, and it obviously causes a lot of feelings. So talking more about your values when we're talking about abortion helps us have more productive conversations. It opens the door to invite other people to talk about abortion access and why it matters to them. And it also helps to lower the temperature, which, as we're probably aware, is usually at a rolling boil all the time. So those larger shared values that I'm talking about, we have heard from every single one of these panelists so far. I'm talking about dignity and rights, freedom and autonomy, health and well-being, equity and justice and compassion. And we've heard that from every single one of these speakers. You've heard religious freedom. You've seen freedom to make healthcare decisions without government intervention. We've heard health and well-being. We've heard autonomy and compassion, and we've heard about justice. So when we talk about abortion under those umbrellas, it's a lot easier than getting dragged down into the mud on specifics. It allows us to talk about our values as people existing in this world together. Second, I need you to talk to your state senators about abortion all the time, all the time. And I need you too to be very clear that, well, hopefully you will join us in opposing any further restrictions on abortion access in Nebraska, because they need to know that this issue isn't going to be forgotten. They need to know that it is critical, that it is important, and it is not your run-of-the-mill policy issue where we're going to be making compromises with contract lobbyists in the rotunda. That's not what we're doing this time around. It's not what we did on 933, and it's not what we're doing in the next session. And when we get into the legislative session in January, we fully anticipate that there will be an abortion ban proposed. Depending on how the elections go, this could be a total ban, or this could be what they're talking about in the Senate with the 15-week ban. But we're going to need you to stay engaged. I like to set a calendar reminder that just says, oh, it's time to email your state senator and tell them that you support abortion access, and just send a nice email or an aggressive email, however you feel about it that day, whatever the news is like. And also connect with our organizations. We will make sure that you know when a bill gets introduced, We'll tell you what that bill says. We'll tell you, Scout will make a rundown for you about what that bill's, the legal implications of that bill. Andy's gonna tell you about healthcare access. Dr. Gustin's gonna tell you about how this impacts IVF and reproductive healthcare. Rabbi.
Take it.
You'll take it. That's fine. Rabbi is going to tell you about how this impacts the practice of your faith tradition. We're going to tell you when a hearing date's scheduled, how to coordinate a carpool, what snacks to bring, how many to bring. That's really important, actually. When to be in the rotunda shouting your heart out with us to protect our freedoms. And third, I am going to desperately need you to vote. It is National Register to Vote Day. The last trigger ban, LB 933, was defeated by only 2 votes. 2 votes. And I cannot emphasize enough how close that is. And when an abortion ban comes up again next session, it will be with entirely half of a new legislature who has never stepped foot in that Capitol before. I can't tell you who to vote for or against. I'm representing a nonprofit up here, but it is campaign season. It's door knocking season. It's candidate call season. And as a voter who cares about these issues, you should feel perfectly fine to ask these candidates where they stand on abortion. More specifically, you need to ask them, will you oppose any further restrictions on abortion access in Nebraska? Because here's what's going to happen, and here's what's been happening in other states. Depending on how the election goes, they will introduce a total ban, and the fight will be quick and incredibly painful if we don't vote. Or they're going to introduce something that seems reasonable, but just so you know, there is no such thing as a reasonable abortion ban, and we've heard all the reasons for that up here. So you have the power as a voter to get folks on the record now and to vote accordingly, so that when we walk into next session, we have some backstop of accountability, which is admittedly becoming more porous, but we're going to use it for right now. And it still matters. So we need you to stay engaged. We need you to stay mad, but we also need you to take care of yourself and each other. And if we can figure out how to do all of that, I think we're going to be okay.
Very nice. And now we're ready to hear from you. So hopefully you've put some questions on your cards and hand them to Pam or Sharon. And while we're doing that, I just have a question that I would like to ask. In Nebraska, we have always been considered a quote conservative state, right? How have we managed so far to keep real restrictions and bans out of our state?
So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because if you follow this stuff regularly, which I do, I get paid to, but if you've seen a map of what's going to happen after Roe is overturned, Nebraska has always been a state that they listed as one that would ban abortion pretty quickly. We've surprised everybody. People don't understand Nebraska politics, which is working in our favor, right? We have a unicameral, we have a filibuster. People don't know that. They think we're just like every other conservative state. But the reason that we've been able to hang on to access so far is because of partly what Aaron's talking about. People have gone out and voted, and they have continued to elect people who support access to abortion. I don't know if I mentioned this, but one of the restrictions we have on the books in Nebraska is a 20-week abortion ban. So it was the first pre-viability abortion ban in the country, actually happened right here in Nebraska in 2010. In 2010, 5 senators out of 49 voted against that bill. Last year, we beat the trigger ban by 2 votes. That means there were 18 senators that did not vote for it. So we went from 5 to 18 within a matter of 12 years. That's how we've been able to hang on to access to abortion. Folks have shown up to vote. Aaron mentioned how important voting in local elections is. I will drive it home even a little bit more. The 2 votes that we won the last fight by came down, you could figure out how they came down to about 120 individual votes. One of those senators won their election by 20 votes. The other senator won their election by about 100 votes. So when people tell you or say, my vote doesn't matter anyway, tell them that it does matter. It can come down to a small handful of votes that will make the difference between whether or not we have abortion access in Nebraska. So people have been voting, people have been engaged. We have senators that are willing to fight for us, and we need to keep it that way.
Can I add to that?
Please.
So if you were following what happened in Kansas, when people were allowed to vote specifically on the issue of abortion, they overwhelmingly voted to protect abortion access. And after that, something I heard from one of the advocates who was organizing down there was that Kansas has always been viewed as a conservative state, but it's actually not a conservative state, it's a hostage state. So like the overwhelming majority of people supporting abortion access, but it being determined by a very small group of people not representative of the larger thing. I just thought that was an interesting way to sort of conceptualize it.
And we know from recent polling in Nebraska, the same
Yeah.
is true in Nebraska. The majority of Nebraskans do support abortion access and don't want to see it restricted.
Mhm.
That's a good phrase to remember, for sure. Pam, you've got some questions for us?
That's good. It'd be weird if.
I
you
know,
didn't.
it is good. Okay, this one is for Stephanie. Please explain more about the 22-week pregnancy and inviability.
So kind of what Andy was, so a pregnancy is dated by your last menstrual period. So you ovulate halfway through. So like 2 weeks in. And so it's either a 20 or a 22-week ban, depending on how you're referencing the gestational age of the pregnancy. So that's not viability. That's just the ban that Nebraska chose, just to be clear. Approximately with current technology, a fetus can live outside the mother's womb 50% of the time at about 24 weeks. So there have been some fetuses that have been delivered and resuscitated at 23, like at the very, even like close to 23 weeks that have survived. But there is a significant amount of morbidity and mortality in those cases of fetuses that are delivered that early. So I just want to make sure it's clear, 22 or 20 weeks is not a viability thing. It's just a random gestational age that Nebraska chose, just like 15 weeks is a random gestational age that Lindsey Graham chose. And then, 24 weeks is kind of what we talk about viability per se.
Thank you.
So, okay, so this question, we hear a lot about the rights of women. Who's speaking for the right of each baby in the womb? What about the freedoms of the unborn babies, and do they have a voice also?
I think Rabbi.
Rabbi. Everyone's looking at you, Rabbi.
I was gonna keep my mouth shut the rest of the evening. Yeah, I think that at least for Jewish law, as far as Jewish law is concerned, right, there isn't a baby to speak of, right, which is the conversation, right? I mean, there are other ways to read the text, I'm sure, but everything that I've been able to look at is that everything is about the mother. I mean, in some ways, and I don't mean to parse language up here with people who are experts, but in Judaism, you could say you're pro-life, you're just on the pro-life side of the mother, right? Would be a different way of saying it for many Jews. But there is no conversation about a baby or life for a religion that cares so deeply about life. There is no life until you can see the head of the child, at birth. There's nothing to talk about.
My mic off? No. Yes. Oh. Okay, we got some really good questions here. The next one, they like the topic. Are you considering a follow-up conversation entitled Reproductive Responsibilities in Nebraska?
You should take that up with the State Board of Education.
I was gonna say,
Wow.
I don't know.
I think this is, I may not agree exactly with the premise, but I think generally, one of the things that's important to understand here is it's all under attack. It's not just abortion. We saw last year attempts to help people understand reproductive responsibility, how their bodies work, how to keep themselves safe and healthy, came under extreme attack by people who did not think those were appropriate conversations for young people to be a part of, we've seen that. We've seen attacks on birth control access interstate. The Title 10, federal Title 10 program was attacked a couple of years ago in the legislature, which provides free and low-cost birth control to low-income folks in our state. So this is not, trying to kind of push it toward if people were just more responsible or if people were more this or that. That's not the right conversation to be having. Nebraskans need all of it. They need access to comprehensive sex education. They need access to birth control, other types of contraception, STD testing, all of it. And they need access to abortion. One does not negate the need for another, but we need all of it to have the healthiest Nebraska we possibly can.
Thank you. Where
Agreed,
does
thank you.
adoption enter into the conversation?
I didn't hear the question.
Where does adoption enter into the conversation?
I think the fundamental point here, if we go back to those shared values, is that it is not the government's decision to decide for anyone if, when, or how to become a parent. So adoption, again, is like adoption and abort, they're not, this is all a similar conversation, because the foundational problem here is that the government is attempting to decide for Nebraskans if, when, and how to become a parent, and adoption fits into that. It's a choice for anyone.
This is for Rabbi Stephen. What is the greatest challenge and opportunity, respectively, for interfaith organizing regarding the issue of reproductive justice?
Coordinating lunches, is that? No, I'm
What,
kidding.
what should you have to drink? That's an interesting question. You want to be able to have, I think, respect for all different beliefs and a certain level of understanding and humility for the fact that I believe I know what's right, as you said beautifully, right? What's right for your family. I come to that somewhat from a different lens, right? From a Jewish lens. So it doesn't have to be even interfaith. It could be, with all due respect, even other Jewish colleagues. To be able to disagree and have the humility that I think I'm 99.9% right, but there's still something there that says I may be wrong, right? Because if you don't do that, you should be running the other way from whoever's talking to you. But I think the idea is not necessarily to be changing people's perspectives, but I think if you're able to sit and have a respectful dialogue, something Aaron actually spoke about beautifully, to have a conversation where you're talking about your values and why you believe what you believe and how you believe that, maybe take the text actually and put that aside. I think you can get there. If you're at a place where you're simply talking about all of this different nuances, at least from my conversations with some of my, specifically Christian colleagues, there are times where we push it aside, where that isn't the conversation that we have, honestly. But when we have it, we're having, what I believe to be, highly spirited, respectful conversation about what it is, so that I'm walking away feeling like I was heard and they were walking away like they were heard. That doesn't mean that they're not, but the only thing I will add to that is, and you correct me when I've screwed this up, is that they're louder than I am. Right? Like, I'm fickle. Their side on this argument is much louder. They send many more emails, and they do this better than I've done it, or that, with all due respect, the Jewish community as a whole has done it. So that would be the one thing that I have so much respect for what they've done, because on their organizing side, they've pulled this off much better than we have.
And I think that that's a reflection of the fact that a large percentage of the population knows that these decisions that are being made are extremely private, and they really shouldn't be front and center. They're certainly not my business or anyone. Does that make sense? So I think we're trying to navigate now, sort of becoming more outspoken about something that we all, I think, could agree is a very private matter that it shouldn't have to be voiced in such a way. So I think we're just learning.
Thank you. We hear about efforts to restrict. Are there corresponding efforts in states to expand or ensure women's reproductive rights?
Can take that.
Absolutely.
there's currently about 15 states who do have explicit protections for abortion. And there are also legal challenges pending in certain states that have banned abortion. And those are largely based on some state constitutions have privacy protections within those constitutions. So a lot of those challenges that you see are based on those protections that have been found in state constitutions. And then some states do have explicit protections for abortion care as well. And that's about 15 or so states right now, and the District of Columbia as well. So.
Thank you. This is for Dr. Gustin. Please discuss the impact of Dobbs on medical school curriculum.
Oh. I don't think that medical women and people with uteruses now, and certainly will hurt future generations if the people who are training to become healthcare providers do not have exposure, access to this essential healthcare.
Thank you. What can we as Jews do to ensure that trans intersect people in our community are included in our discussion on bodily autonomy?
You volunteered for this.
I didn't actually. I didn't. I think we simply need to be able to keep talking about it, right? I think that these were conversations that probably for so long, and maybe for my language of the other side being better at it, they got comfortable about talking about our bedrooms, right? And I think that if we get more comfortable with having these conversations, that it doesn't matter what community we're talking about, we'll be able to feel comfortable having that conversation. So right now, when we feel awkward, perhaps having a conversation about abortion, about any type of reproductive health, that conversation, the minute we feel awkward, I think we need to be a bit curious to ourselves and say why. And the minute we can figure out that why, become a bit more knowledgeable and be able to feel comfortable having that conversation or asking the question, I don't understand, I need to know more. So I think as Jews, the best thing we do for our entire tradition is ask questions. So I think the more questions that we ask and be curious won't hurt us.
Thank you. This is for Gilda. How have other countries, many of which are very Christian or Catholic, navigated abortion successfully?
The countries that have liberalized their abortion laws have done it for a few different types of reasons. It's not been uncommon for the effort to make abortion legal to be founded in wanting to protect women's health, because in those countries they have seen women dying from unsafe abortion. Some countries have moved to make abortion legal because it's embedded in human rights doctrines in their regions. And some countries have moved to make abortion legal because they recognize that it's basic health care. And so at the government level, those are some of the real motivators that we've seen. And I think it's particularly powerful. All of those motivators are powerful, but they have seen their women dying. And we haven't seen that yet. And at the level of women and people and couples, it's a very personal experience, and we've seen people navigating it in some of the ways that I described, circumventing the laws. A lot of people don't even know the laws in their countries. Even in this country, a lot of people don't know the law in their state. So in a way, it's irrelevant what the law is, but in another way, there's this chilling effect. You just assume it's illegal because it's stigmatized. So we see it play out in a lot of different ways. I don't know if I got to the question itself.
Are there any projections on the economical impact of an abortion ban in the state.
Aaron, you want to take that?
Sure I do. Yeah, there is an incredible economic impact on the state, and I think the projection, so when they overturned Roe, Treasury came out and said that it would cost an estimated $115 billion in economic loss, in terms of like lost wages, decreased productivity in the workforce. I don't know if anyone has had a baby in here, but they're fairly tiring and exhausting, and you have to spend a lot of time with them. And when they're toddlers and probably into teenagers, then they leave. But in any case, and it costs about $300,000, the newest estimates, to raise a child from birth to 18 years old. In Nebraska, women ages 18 to 44 make up 47.4% of the workforce. And if we enact any further restriction on abortion, it's projected that that'll cost us about $1 billion in lost revenue workforce. And for all the reasons that we already know, women are primarily responsible for caretaking duties. They are most often employed in jobs that do not pay a living wage. And they are disproportionately impacted by basically everything that we could possibly throw at them. Add to this, and this is related to the earlier question about who's speaking for the unborn. I would be curious. I've worked in economic security and housing justice and food security in this state for more years than I'd like to feel. And I think that we currently exist in a state that has almost no economic supports for women with children, for any baby that comes out of the womb past the 60 days that Medicaid covers them, particularly for low-income women. We have consistently gutted access to healthy food. We have gutted our public education systems. We have gutted access to temporary assistance for needy families and denied 90% of applicants, while sitting on $118 million in a rainy day fund that we will not give to people who need it. We have evicted pregnant mothers. We have evicted them and their families. We have evicted their grandmothers. And we have almost no protections in place for anybody who would come into this world with even the smallest economic barrier facing them, for all of the systemic reasons that we have consistently perpetuated and onto people in our community. So yeah, economic consequences are dire. I had to come up on some levity there in the end, sorry. Economic consequences are dire. It's going to be a huge mess. And what we're doing is we are forcing people to give birth into a system that has absolutely no economic supports for women and family currently in the state of Nebraska. So that's a good way to end it.
We're not quite ending yet.
Well, for me,
Yeah.
I'm going to leave.
Aaron, you don't go anywhere.
I can't.
So Rabbi, this is partly a question
yeah.
for you. Given everything that Aaron just threw out at us, as a Jewish community, what is our responsibility for the born, for the mothers, for the young children of these mothers who are in such economic dire straits? And what can we do as perhaps a Jewish Community Relations Council with other partners to help either on the legislative end to, in the next session in terms of maybe creating some bills that might provide for the use of those rainy day funds, or I'm open to suggestions here.
We'd love to have you join us. Got
About to
quite a
say,
few
I
ideas.
think that's number one. I mean, Sharon, to that question, yours or otherwise, I think the number one thing we need to do is better listen to women behind, who are here, who are giving expert advice on what we can and should be able to do, right? I realize I can't speak that has been said. The Jewish community doesn't always speak with one voice. But I mean, for what it's worth for me, I would suggest the JCRC be able to be next to these organizations when they're showing up and to be able to do that work. I think as Aaron, kind of pointed out, and maybe this is, I hope the direction you were going, is to the question that was asked about, who's speaking for the babies. No one's speaking for the other folks as well who are alive. So the idea that we'd be speaking for the unborn is a bit preposterous in some ways, right? We're not speaking for those that are born and aren't being taken care of in our communities. So as far as Judaism is concerned, right, this would seem to be, when you're talking about human life and human dignity, there is nothing more important. So whether it be the dignity of parents, mothers, to be able to take care of children, that would seem to be, to me, something that's paramount in our value system. So what that means, if that's, of course, has been mentioned, voting, if that means showing up at the unicameral, if that means giving so that we can be able to have, what have you, phone banking, to knocking on doors, those would all seem to be things that I would suggest the community be able to be part of. I'm far from the expert in being able to do those, but those things are being said, I think, loud and clear up here.
Can I plug two things for you? If we're talking about protecting babies. We're gonna have two big pushes in the next legislative session. We, under ARPA, so under COVID, we were able to expand access to childcare subsidies. Anyone in here tried to afford childcare lately? Raise your hand. Okay, yep, you're thinking about it up there. No, get ready. So expanding access to childcare subsidies so more parents can enter the workforce. There's also something called the cliff effect associated with any public assistance program, which the minute you go over a certain income, you get kicked off assistance, like go off the cliff. So we've been able to expand eligibility on the front end, and we've been able to increase that step down on the back end. We've done the same thing with access to SNAP. So that's what you would know as food stamps. Both of those are set to expire next year. And there will be a legislative push where we will be asking to either extend that sunset or make those permanent. So if you're interested in a pro-family agenda, if you are interested in supporting women and their babies, may I suggest these two very worthy causes to you to join with us to support families in Nebraska. And I'm happy to follow up with more information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I know that there is a role to play for religious leaders and for religious institutions, and they will step up. But Scout, has anybody asked a legislator in Nebraska, legislator, how they plan to take care of all of the babies that are born as a result of forced pregnancy?
Has anyone asked?
Yeah.
I think they have been asked, but I think that just goes to what's been said is that, we need to continue to hold our legislators accountable, given not only this threat of abortion bans, but also, as Andy was mentioning, all the threats, the critical race theory, the anti-sex education, the attacks on trans rights. And so I think it just goes to that piece that we've all talked about, is not only making them answer, but then holding them accountable with what that answer is.
Thank you. One final question, Andy, for you or anybody else who wants to answer. When you're talking to people who are opposed to abortion or want to ban it, do they understand that it won't prevent the need for it? That all it will do is to punish people for getting pregnant, and it will punish victims of sexual assault. It will punish people who have dangerous pregnancies and need help. Does that resonate?
Not that I have found, no. To give a simple answer. I mean, the thing that's, again, we have with Texas at this point, we have almost a year of data and information and stories and all of that coming out of that state that has virtually had abortion banned for an entire year. And one of the things that has happened there is that 90% of people who wanted an abortion have still accessed an abortion, whether that was legally within the state under the 6-week period that was allowed for a little bit, or by going out of state, or by ordering abortion medications online, or however they chose to go about that. So the reality is that banning abortion doesn't stop abortion. We know that. As long as Senator Megan Hunt says this all the time, as long as women have been able to get pregnant, women have been able to figure out ways to end pregnancies. They will continue doing that. And to me, it's getting out of the way of physicians and patients being able to make their own decisions and making it as safe and healthy as possible for folks.
I think coming to it as a physician, I think a decent talking point, even if you're not necessarily talking about abortion in general, is just criminalizing physicians for providing basic healthcare is a problem. It is a huge problem. I think that that's something that if you said, you know, gosh, if I had an appendicitis and I had to go to the emergency room and I had to be in septic shock to have my doctor call a lawyer to make sure that they could do the surgery, like that's medical malpractice and it's negligence, right? But now there's places and states where a patient has an ectopic pregnancy and they have to become hemodynamically unstable. Their blood counts have to drop. They have to show that they're hemorrhaging into their abdomens before this ectopic pregnancy, a pregnancy that would never become a baby, can be treated safely. And that is horrible. And that's what we're facing in Nebraska if we don't stand our ground. So I think something that is just an easier topic if someone is unwilling to talk about protecting access to abortion is to say that physicians shouldn't be criminalized for providing basic medical care and just changing it in that way. And I think almost all Nebraskans would agree with that, especially when you relate it to something that's also considered basic healthcare, because reproductive care is basic healthcare.
Can I add? I keep doing this. Can I add?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Well, you told me I was not least, so I feel like so adding to what both Andy and Dr. Gustin have said, I feel like this kind of gets into the conversation about like, well, if there's exceptions, and we always hear that, right? Like this bill doesn't even have exceptions for rape or incest or IVF or any of those horrifying or necessary. I didn't mean to lump in IVF into horrifying. You know what I mean? There's no exceptions in this bill. And that becomes really problematic because I would encourage everyone to just kind of think through what that means. Like, even if there was an exception for rape, what you're asking a rape victim and survivor to do is prove their trauma is worthy enough to access healthcare. What you're asking someone who is having a miscarriage or an ectopic pregnancy is that their healthcare is traumatic enough, is dangerous enough to deserve care. Like that's what's happening there. It's like, it's easy, I think, to talk about like these exceptions and like this is reasonable or this isn't reasonable. But if you think through what does that process look like for the person going through it, it becomes a lot more difficult, and it becomes a lot more, I think, or it explains a lot of sort of where we're all at on, not all of you, I've just met you, and Rabbi, you seem lovely, but everyone, these other 4 women that I work with, why our stance is so very clear and our line is so very clear. There is no further restrictions on abortion. There are no exceptions and no compromises. No matter what we do, no matter how reasonable it sounds, it will create an absolute chaotic bureaucracy that is going to require pregnant Nebraskans to prove that they are worthy of care. And that is unacceptable.
Thank you, for sure. Did you have questions from people on Zoom? Is that why you're standing there?
No, I have a comment and a question. My name is Wendy Goldberg. Thank you so much for everything that you have offered today. Rabbi, I want to add on to one thing that you said about interreligious dialogue related to this topic. I think healthy curiosity is really important for us to bridge difference and for us to come into relationship with each other to coexist. However, religious freedom at a time that our country is being taken hostage by the conservative Christian agenda requires that we as Jewish people stand strong together. And I don't believe that we spoke enough tonight to the concepts and the importance of religious freedom as 1 or 2% of the population in this country. I have invited Rachel Lazar, who is the executive director of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, to speak with me on October 27th. It's on Zoom. It's available for all of you to attend. And she will be speaking to the topics that are upcoming in the Supreme Court and in the lower courts that are going to have further implications of said agenda. And I think that it's very important for us to stay educated about what's happening in Nebraska, but there's lots more coming in this agenda, especially related to our freedoms as Jews to practice as we see fit. And so the moment is very important for us to stay in relationship to the religious other and to the national agenda.
Thank you. Thank you. This is not the end of the discussion. This is the beginning or the middle. It will continue. It will continue with us. It will continue with other religious groups and non-religious groups. It's a topic that is not going away, that is for sure. I want to close by thanking this panel, this wonderful panel. I want to thank the Jewish Community Relations Council, that is an agency of the Jewish Federation of Omaha. I want to thank the co-sponsors, the Women's Fund of Omaha, Planned Parenthood Advocates, and ACLU Nebraska for joining us. But I have a last thing to leave you with. Oh, yes, and Sharon won't forgive me if I don't mention the QR code in your program. So please click on that and then tell me how you do it, because I've never done it.
I'll show you.
There'll be more, thank you. There'll be more information and a place where you can evaluate. So the question was for our panel for this evening was, where do we go from here? So you've heard from the experts a little bit, we can't get to all of it, about where we go from here and some of the arguments and the things that we want to have in our discussions. But now I want to ask you, rhetorically, where do you go from here? What do you see as your next steps? Because you have a role to play. One of them is to vote. We have somebody outside that's going to be doing voter registration for anybody who has not done that yet. But you do have a role to play, and don't think that you don't. And contacting your senators and being engaged is part of that role. So I'm going to trust that everybody here is going to continue to do that, because it's really, really important. Please join us for some refreshments and some social hour with or without your mask. I guess I'm going to put mine on, but however you choose, once again. And thank you for coming.